Hello, everyone. Is it on? Okay. Can I ask everyone to take your seats, please? We are going to start the lecture. May I ask you to please take the seat? Thank you. Welcome to this presentation about using MyHeritage to find your ancestors from the Netherlands. My name is Yvette Hoitink. I'm a professional genealogist from the Netherlands, and I'm going to give you an overview of the stuff you can find to help you research your Dutch ancestors using MyHeritage. Out of respect for others, please silence any electronic devices. Please respect copyright, but if you want to use the slides for your personal study, they are available online, and I will show the URL again at the end of the session. So feel free to download the slides, the handout, or a list of common Dutch terms for your own use. So please raise your hand if you have ancestors from the Netherlands. It's supposed to be the majority of you. Well done. Congratulations. And why do I say congratulations? Why is it a good thing for a genealogist to have Dutch ancestors? Well, Dutch records are awesome. We have many records that were created in the first place. Many of them have been preserved to this day, and many of them are online. So we can do a lot of our research using websites like MyHeritage and find out more about our Dutch ancestors. So I'm going to start with an overview of the Dutch collections you can find at MyHeritage. I'm first going to show you how you can do that using the search function. And if you want more detailed information about how to use the search function and the browse functions at MyHeritage, I recommend you watch Cindy Engel's presentation that she gave earlier today. If you weren't there, you can watch the recordings. So she goes more into the use of the website of MyHeritage, and I will focus more on the types of records you can find. So from the Super Search page, you can go to the right side, select Search All Records, and then you can scroll down until you see the world map, and you can zoom into Europe and then to the Netherlands. Since I'm in the Netherlands, it will give me a shortcut, search records from the Netherlands, but if you are using MyHeritage from another country, that may not be there, so you may need to drill down using the map. And then you get the list on the right of all the different Dutch record collections that MyHeritage has. And that includes a wide range of records. There's the civil registration records, the church records, population registers, newspapers, all sorts of announcements, cemetery records, and court and notarial records. And I'm going to give you a quick overview of what all those records types mean and how you can use them for your own research. One thing I want to make sure that is understood is that the quality of information you can find on a website like MyHeritage can vary. So the most reliable with the least chance of errors are the original records. The scans of things we can see, we can read what the people wrote down at the time. Of course, there can be errors in that. People lied, people made mistakes. But if you then create an index of that record, you may make a typo or you may omit information. So indexes have a little more chance of error. And if you then compile all that information into a tree, you may accidentally combine the baptismal record of one person with the marriage record of another with the same name and fail to recognize that it is the same person. So family trees have even more risk of interpretation errors. And so I always use family trees and indexes as stepping stones to get to the original records, which I then analyze and draw my own conclusions from. And the wonderful thing is with MyHeritage, you have access to all three of these types of records. So how do you find records using the research search form? So this is often when you have a specific research question in mind, you can use the search form and search for those records. So this searches in all Dutch records at once. So once you drill down to the Netherlands, you can search all the Dutch record collections with one search question. In this case, I'm going to search for my ancestor Dorothea Smulders from Tilburg, 1809. And I'm really lucky because MyHeritage has specific Tilburg record sets. So that helps with this research. And in the results, I get a list of all different types of records they found for her. In this case, 54 records, including 46 in family trees. And I like to go to the birth, marriage, and death records first. So I drill down. On the left, I select birth, marriage, and death. And I see they have her death record and her marriage record. I can then click through and get a short summary, an index of the record, which gives us the information from the record, like the marriage date, the spouse, etc. And this is very easy if you are not yourself from the Netherlands, because all the field labels are translated in whatever language you use MyHeritage in. So even if you don't read Dutch, this will say July instead of juli, and it will say husband instead of bruidegom. So this is a lot more useful. And you can click through, and in this case the original scan is attached. Otherwise you may need to go to another website to see the scan. I have some links in the handouts where you can find some of these scans. And this is the scan of the actual marriage record from 1835 of my ancestors. And it's 2 full pages long, and it has their signatures and everything. So it's a very nice record to have. Another way to find records is using the record matches from your tree. So if I go into my tree and go to Dorothea Smulders, I then see in the upper right corner that I have 9 record matches. So this means that MyHeritage, the smart little robots of MyHeritage have been searching all the information, and they found 9 records that might be relevant for me. And I can click on that and see what they have. And one of the records that they find is the death records, another one is the marriage record. That's the same record I found the other way, but it's nice to be able to have 2 different ways to find stuff. And I can review the match. And again, you can now immediately go to confirm the match, but I recommend first clicking through to the actual underlying original record, if it's available, to see if the information matches what you have, if it's the right person. Because in the Netherlands, a lot of people name children after family members, so it's not unusual to have 3 or 4 different cousins by the same name. And this is the death record. And then I can check that and say, oh yes, this is my ancestor. And I click confirm, and I can then compare the information that's in the record to the information that's in my tree already and see the differences. And here I see that I had her mother as Anna Maria de Bond, and this record had her as Johanna Maria de Bond. Those are minor discrepancies that happen a lot, especially in the first years of the civil registration. So it's still the same person, but I can now choose which name I want to copy to my family tree before I save this record. So what is this civil registration record? You had a question? The information, so the question is, the information from the scans, can there be typos? Yes, the indexes, so the typed version, the ones that you see on the screens, this can have typos and errors in it. Every time you copy something, if a volunteer enters stuff, there's a small risk of errors. So when in doubt, always go back to the original record. So I'm not going to tell you what those civil registration records are and how you can use them for your research. The civil registration was introduced in 1811 during the French occupation of the Netherlands, and it registers all births, marriages and deaths in the Netherlands, and it's, the same registration goes to this day. So a civil registration birth record looks like this. This is Dorothea's son, Gerardus van de Heuvel, born in 1853, and it will give the place where the birth was registered, which had to be the place where the child was born, including the registration date, and the requirement was to register the birth within 5 working days. So the registration date is not the birth date. So make sure if you're checking the original record that you don't go for the first date and then take a lot of effort to translate it and then find out that no, that's not the actual birth date. In this case, he was born on the 25th of December. So town hall was closed. So his father came in on the 27th to record his birth. The informant is listed, that's usually the father. So regulations said that the birth had to be registered by the father. If the father was absent, for example, if he was a sailor away at sea, or if he was in prison, or if he was unknown, then either a person who attended the birth or a person in whose house the child was born was required to register the birth. And these circumstances make these records very reliable because they're first-hand informants giving this information. And anytime you see an obstetrician or a midwife, registering a birth, you need to really look at what the record says, because it might indicate an absent husband and possible prison records. Don't we all love prison records? Or it could be that the mother was not married, and if she was married, it will list her husband. But if there's no husband there, then the child may have been born out of wedlock, and you may need to turn to other types of records, like DNA records, to get your answers. It also gives information about the mother. It doesn't always give the age or an occupation, but it at least gives her name. It names the child and when and where he was born. Kerstkind, yes, a Christmas child, yes. And the witnesses. So these are 2 witnesses, and they did not have to have first-hand information. So these could be people that the informant brought, like neighbors or family members, or people who just happened to be at town hall. So you often see policemen or a clerk at the town hall acting as witnesses. And at the bottom of the record, it says who signed the record, and in this case, the father and the witnesses all could not write, so there are no signatures, but otherwise there would have been. The only signature is from the registrar, who obviously could read and write. The marriage record is kind of the backbone of Dutch genealogy, especially after 1811. It has a lot of information. So this is the marriage record of the Christmas child Gerardus van de Heuvel we just saw. He married in 1881. And this record again starts with when and where it was created. It gives the information of the groom, including his age and place of birth, the names of his parents, if they were still living, and if so, where. So this is very complete, and this will link 2 different generations together, because you've got the husband with his wife, and you've got both their parents. So that's very useful to reliably link different generations. It will also tell you which records they had to submit to get married, to show they were eligible to get married. For example, abstracts of their birth records, proof that the groom fulfilled military service, either by serving or by exemption. And so that's another nice way to see what was going on. And then it says the marriage went through, that they both said yes. It gives 4 witnesses, including often the relationship to the bride and groom. And in some areas, they were family members. In other areas, like in Friesland, I often see just random people from town hall. So it can pay off to look at them, because sometimes they're family members and they can offer a clue to further generations. And again, it will say who signed the record. In this case, the bride could not read and write, but the groom could. So we have some nice signatures of ancestors, which I always like. And so if the parents were present, they would sign the record as well. Death records, they have a similar structure. So he died in 1918. I think he may have died from the Spanish flu, but it's important to note that death records do not list the cause of death. So you can see where and when he died, but you can't see why or the reason. So we can speculate, it was 1918, the Netherlands was neutral in World War I, so he wasn't involved in any war activities, so it may have been the flu, we don't know. And again, it starts with the where and when the record was created, which again could be up to 5 days later. So if a person died, you had up to 5 days to register it. The informants had to have personal knowledge of the death, and they also acted as witnesses. And it gives you when and where the deceased was, where and when the deceased died. And it also gives the name of spouses and parents. So this again helps you to link them to the other records you can find. And those 3 records can really build a strong framework for research in the 1800s.
Mag ik een vraag stellen?
Ja.
Wie was wie en deze zoekmogelijkheid? Waar zit er nu meer informatie of is het een volledige overlap?
Okay, this question about we was we I'll take at the end, because otherwise I may not have the time to finish my own. Thank you, that's a big topic, so thank you. Population register is a registration of residents, of who lived where. So in many countries they just did the decennial censuses. In the Netherlands, since 1850, they started keeping them up to date. So that's very nice. You can see who lived where, exactly when, since 1850. And this is an example from the Van de Heuvel Smulders family, 1870, 1880. And you can see records that are struck through. That's every time a person died or moved out, they struck it through. And every time a new person entered the household, for example, a new child was born, or a servant moved in, or another family member moved in, they added a line. So these records can be complicated to read because they cover 10 years. So you have to be aware that you're not looking at a snapshot. It looks like a snapshot, but actually it's a movie. It's a period of 10 years that shows you all the dynamics in the family of people entering, exiting, being born, dying. And in fact, on this page, we see two families, because the first family moved out, my ancestors moved away, and the second family moved in, and they're on the same page because this is the page for this particular house in this period. And you see the column headers, which include when and where they came from and when and where they went. So you can use these to then go to the other town where they moved to and find them there and trace them all through their lives until they died or emigrated. And so these are two different families, and they're not related. They just happen to live in the same house at different places. So all people on the page did not live in this household at the same time. They were in different periods in this 10-year period. They all lived here, but it doesn't mean they lived at the same time. So originally it was organized per address. Then in 1920 they got tired of copying whole families over and over again, so they organized them by family card and then just updated the addresses as long as people stayed in the same municipality. And then in 1938 they switched to a system per person, and in 94 they switched to a database. And you can order records. The last two, you can order extracts via the website cbg.nl. Church records. So when the civil registration was introduced in 1811, they needed a basis. They needed to have the proof of birth, of identity. So they required the churches to turn over all their baptismal, marriage, and burial records from before 1811. So they can now be found in government archives. And they are the most important source of vital information before 1811. And the difference between the pre-1811 records and the post-1811 records can be pretty big. So we here just have a 3-line record, and this is a baptismal record. It doesn't even give us the date of birth, it just gives the date of baptism. In this case, it's in Latin, because the family was Roman Catholic. So you may need to brush up on more than just your Dutch language, you may need to brush up on your Latin as well. And it gives the names of the parents, but I've also seen cases where, I turned it off, but it's, okay, sorry. I've also seen cases where the mother isn't mentioned. It just gives the name of the father. So that's difficult in the sense that it's far less informative. It doesn't give the names of people like witnesses that can help. Witnesses are here, but it doesn't give you as much information as the ones in the birth records. Witnesses that are there, they're not always recorded in the baptismal records, but they were often close family members. So if you're looking how the families fit together, those can be vital clues. And also the names of the children, because they were often named after family members. In many areas, the first child was named after the grandparents, so the first son after the paternal grandfather, first daughter after the maternal grandmother, etc. Though in some areas they only named after deceased grandparents, so they waited until a person was deceased. And in a way you can sometimes use the names of the grandchildren to determine when grandfather died, because the first son was not named after him and the second son was, then he probably died between son number 1 and 2. This is a marriage record. And interestingly, this is in the Dutch Reformed Church. So this is the same boy that was baptized in 1713. Here he marries in 1749. But he marries in the Dutch Reformed Church. And that is because up until 1811, the civil authorities only recognized marriages before the Alderman's Court or in the Dutch Reformed Church. So if you have people going to different types of churches, you would get a marriage in the Dutch Reformed Church or the Alderman's Court, and you may as well find records in the church that they regularly attended. So in this case, it gives quite a bit of information for a record from before 1811, but it doesn't give the name of the parents for Johannes. It does give the name of the father for his wife, but his parents were deceased. So he was assisted by his uncle. So we know his uncle's name, but we don't know his parents' names. And that's pretty typical for records before 1811. The marriage records just don't have the detail. Often they don't even have the age or the place of birth. But then it's good to recognize that there are multiple records for the same marriage if you're lucky. You can have a Roman Catholic record and a Dutch Reformed record. Or they could have married in different places, like the bride and groom had marriage banns read in both their places of residence. And there might be records for those in both churches. So you may end up with 4 or more marriage records for the same marriage. And just one of them may have the names of the parents. So you want to make sure you look at them all. Burial records are, if you thought those records were pretty terse, this one's even worse. It's just a one-liner. And it gives us the fact that Jan Mulders, who left children, died in the hamlet of Gorke. And just by this, you don't know, because Jan Smulders was a common name in this place, you don't know if it's the right man. So you have to use other records to see if you can narrow it down. And I knew there were 10 people who died with this name in this period, but I knew from other records that he must have died somewhere in 1764, and this was the only one who died who had children. So that really proved that this was the right one. But by itself, this record is too uninformative to know whether this is the right person. Church records usually start in the 1600s, so you can go back quite a way. And there are other types of records you may be able to use. Newspapers, death notices, prayer cards, cemeteries, these are all different types of records that I'm grouping together now. Newspapers is a wonderful new addition to MyHeritage. We have the Royal Library in the Netherlands that is scanning all the newspapers that were published. And you can search it on their website by doing different, just typing in the names you're looking for. But MyHeritage will automatically search them for you and give you record matches, etc. So that's very convenient. And here we have an example. Other types of things you can find in newspapers, maybe announcements of deaths or birth or bankruptcies, etc. And I really love this kind of resource because it's you never know what you're going to find. It's much more unexpected than looking at civil registration records, where you're pretty sure that most people were born and died, and maybe they married. But it's this gives you a nice chance to get more stories about who those people were. In this case, it's she had her son committed for insanity. So one of her sons was in an asylum. So I need to follow up on that. This gives a date of it gives the name of the court and the date where he was committed to by a judge to go to an insane asylum. So that's worth following up on. Another collection at MyHeritage are the online begraafplaatsen, the Dutch cemeteries. And this is a hint I got from the record matches. And this is my great-grandfather, Gerrit-Jan Hoitink. He died in 1942 during World War II, during a shunting accident with the railroad. He was run over by a train. I got the police reports. This is rather gruesome. And I can view the full record on another website. So MyHeritage not only has collections on their own site, they also index stuff on other websites for the Netherlands. And you can click through and find the actual grave. In this case, because of copyright, I didn't copy the whole photo. But this is the photo, and I've visited the cemetery. It's still there, which is kind of rare because we often clear graves after a couple of years because we only have so much dry land. But he lives on the dry side of the country, so in this case, the burial from 1942 is still there, so that helps.
Can I ask?
Yeah?
You can click on the contact to the volunteer,
Mm-hmm.
and they will send you sometimes within an hour the picture.
Yeah, so the pictures, there's a small picture here, and then you can click through and ask the volunteer, and they will send it to your inbox, the full-size one, for personal use. That's a great service. Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that. And there's also a collection called Online Familieberichten, the death notices. And this is a collection that has both prayer cards and announcements in the newspapers. In this case, it's my great-grandmother on my mother's side, Adriana Trouw. And she died in 1933. And if I click through to Online Familieberichten, I get her prayer card. And I actually already had this one. It was in my family's possession, and I have a nicer scan of it myself. And prayer cards have some vital information. They usually tell when someone died, often when they were born. It doesn't have anything like an obituary that often lacks biographical information. The more recent ones do, but the ones from the early 1900s are pretty basic, and they often cite a few Bible verses and have a nice religious print. And this is for Roman Catholic families only. So that's my mother's side's Roman Catholic, so I have a few of those, and they're very nice to have. But you should always verify the information with the civil registration records, because sometimes the informant for this card didn't know the exact birth date, and they can be a little bit off. Death date they usually knew because the person had just died, but they could make a mistake. Maybe a woman said she was 2 years younger than she was. I don't know that anybody would ever do that, but yes, that happened. So another record type are the court and notarial records, and this covers a wide range of records. I'm going to show you some of the voluntary ones. So that's the ones you're not getting sued, you're not getting prosecuted, but you still need to do some legal business, like drafting a last will. This is the earliest ancestor, female ancestor I have a last will for. This is the one in 1665 from Ellen Laura Skolen. So that's, and it has her signature. So this is the oldest signature I have of a female ancestor. And these types of records can be hard to read, and they take effort. So this is like more of an advanced genealogist to look at, but they are indexed. So you can find them, but then once you get them, you really need to dig in and learn how to read the old script to know what they say. And not just the language, but the script itself is different in this period. Estate divisions after a person died, if they left property or even if they just left household items and there were minor children, there were often the court or the orphan chamber, depending on the area, or the notary would create an inventory of the estate and who got what, or how they auctioned it all off, and the bidders included the family members, just to value everything and to appraise everything, and then they would determine who got what. Yes, sir? So the question is it different than probate records? This is a type of probate records. It's similar. We have a slightly different process, but yeah, you would go to a notary and to have it all settled, or an orphan chamber, if there were minor children involved, would oversee the division of the estate. But it's a similar type of process of making sure the estate is handled well and everybody got what they deserved. Yes. Guardianship accounts, so if there are minor children, you can sometimes find guardianship accounts, including expenses made for the orphans. And this is my favorite record from the past year. This is a receipt for a wedding dress of an ancestor who married in 1628. So she was a minor child, and her parents' estate, the guardianship accounts, included all the receipts for expenses made for the children. And she married, and that made her an adult legally, so that was the final expense made for her. And that little receipt was part of my proof argument why they were the right parents for her, because I knew she had to have married around 27 March 1628, because that's when the receipt was, and that's when my ancestor was married. And I already had other evidence that these were her parents, but this receipt really clinched it. So this is one of my all-time favorite records. I mean, I don't even have a receipt for my own wedding dress, and I have one for my ancestor in 1628. Probably shouldn't have bought mine online then. But the Dutch names, some people have asked me how to handle Dutch names, so I add a little bit of information about that. Only when the civil registration was introduced, last names became mandatory. Before that, most people had last names, so it's a myth that nobody had last names. Most people did. But they weren't always hereditary. Like my own name, Hoitink, that's a farm name. If my ancestors moved to a different farm, they adopted a different name. And large regions of the Netherlands used patronymics. So that's like my father's name is Gerrit, so I would be Yvette Gerrits. And he would be Gerrit Jans, and then he would be Jan Gerrits and Gerrit Derks, etc. So they would name themselves after their father, sometimes in combination with the last name, sometimes without. And that can be tricky to research, because you might be plugging in your last name, hoping to find records before 1811, and it dries up. And especially if you're researching in Friesland or Groningen, the northern provinces, they probably adopted their last name in 1811. So before that, you need to search by the names of by the first names and the patronymic, so the name of the father. And then it can be hard to tell if you've got the right person, so you often need to go beyond the church records and look at those difficult to use, sometimes court records, guardianship records, to see if you can fit the puzzle together. So it slows down. If people don't use last names, the research takes longer per generation to do. We also have prefixes, things like de Vries, Van den Berg, Ter Heuvel, and they are considered in Dutch to be a separate part of the name. So if you pick up a Dutch book and you're looking for de Vries, you want to look under V, not D. And also, the indexers might have put the de in a separate field. So if you search for de Vries as last name, you may not find anything, but you have to search for Vries. So you want to be trying different strategies to see what you can find. And people have asked me how they should fill it in MyHeritage, how they should do this with these different types of names. And this is what I do. There are different ways to do it. But if you have a person with a patronymic only, I fill that in the last name field. If they have both a patronymic and a last name, I fill in the patronymic in the first name field and the last name in the last name field. Last name with prefixes, I always put in the last name field. And this is an example of how this works. Jan Hendricks as a first name, Smulders as a last name. And this is from Gerardus as a first name, Van den Heuvel as a last name. And MyHeritage is pretty good at this. They will match this person with the prefixes to the right records. And when you search and you want to try different options, because not all indexes are created equally, so you want to leave the prefixes off or search for patronymics in the last name field, try for them in the first name field, because yeah, you don't really, it's not really standardized across all the different record sets. So this is something you want to be aware of as a researcher and try different strategies until you find the record you're looking for. Another relatively new record set that we have available as Dutch genealogists is DNA. I know there is a whole DNA track, so I'm only going to touch the surface and show you how you can use MyHeritage to find Dutch matches. Thankfully, DNA testing is becoming more popular in the Netherlands. Initially, it wasn't because everyone asked, well, you have great records. I already know who my great-great-great-grandparents are. But now they're seeing the value of connecting with cousins, but also verifying their trees. And some of us have interesting questions in the first couple of generations. And many people in the Netherlands tested MyHeritage. So I've tested at all the companies, and my best Dutch matches are at MyHeritage. So it's my favorite company to take a DNA test. And so this is me, this is mom, this is your DNA match list. And you can filter that. And if you were looking for people in the Netherlands, you can click the filters list, and it will show you all these different things you can filter your match list for, including the location. So you can select all the people from the Netherlands who match you. And it doesn't mean that your shared ancestors are Dutch, but chances are pretty good that if someone's still living in the Netherlands and you know you have a Dutch line, that if you filter for your matches from the Netherlands, that they might match you on your Dutch line. So that's a filter that I frequently use. So here are two of my matches. And I can then immediately see their last names. And in this case, Ten Barge, Te Beest, Benning, I recognize all of them as names for my father's side. So I can review the match, go into their tree and see how we are related. And since it's my father's side, it's probably related 10 times or more, but that's for an whole other lecture. Another way is to filter by has shared place. So if you have a tree on MyHeritage and you have your Dutch ancestors in there, you can filter for people who share a place. It doesn't necessarily mean they share your Dutch places, but it's still, it can help. And at least this filters it for people who have a tree, which is usually, those matches are the more useful. So that's another one I frequently use. And so that will just help me with that. Another way you can do is you can search for your Dutch names. There's a little icon to the right, a search icon. And if you click it, it will pop up a search box where you can search for a name or an ancestral surname. And this will actually not only search the names of your matches, but also the names in their trees. So you can just type smulders and see who else has smulders in their tree. And that's a great way to filter, if you're working on a specific line, to see if there are anyone among your matches who might help you with that. There's also the ethnicity results, and I found that Dutch DNA, I've tested several people, it's really North and Western European, but it often shows up as Irish, Scottish, Welsh, English, Scandinavian, but always kind of in the right corner of Europe. And these are my own results, for example. I know I'm 99% Dutch, the remaining 1% is German, just across the Dutch border. But it still, it gives my ethnicity as about 33% Irish, Scottish, and Welsh. So it's in the right area. But I heard that there were new improvements coming. So next time, with the next update, I hope to see Winterswijk, Breda, Tilburg. So please make it so. Okay, to conclude, MyHeritage has wonderful records for Dutch research. And whenever possible, you want to verify the information you find in trees and indexes using original records. And you even want to verify information from original records using other original records to see if they're consistent, because any one record can be off. You can use your DNA matches to verify and build your tree. And if you do this, and you persevere, and you learn the script, and you learn the language, you can trace most Dutch lines back to the 1600s or earlier. So that's pretty good. Thank you for your attention. If you would like to learn more about Dutch genealogy or contact me, you can go to my website. And at the bottom is the URL where you can find the slides of my presentation, the handout, and a list of common Dutch terms with their English translations. Thank you very much. Okay, I'll take your question first about wie was wie. Can you please repeat it?
Wie was wie is een site die ik veel gebruik. En je kan ook de gegevens vinden bij MyHeritage. Vind je het nu de voorkeur verdienen dat je rechtstreeks bij wie was wie gaat zoeken? Of is MyHeritage beter of ruimer? Of
Okay, the question is, there's another website in the Netherlands, Wie Was Wie, which also has many records, and there's overlap between MyHeritage and Wie Was Wie. I think MyHeritage excels in the tools like the record matching, etc. So you can go to your tree and you can get all these different hints. And I will use that. Sometimes when I know that I want a particular record and I know it's not on MyHeritage and I know it's on Wie Was Wie, I go there. So I think as genealogists we have to be flexible and go where the records are.
Yeah.
And a growing number of records on MyHeritage means that you can do more of your research there. But if it's not on MyHeritage, of course, you go elsewhere. We go where the records are.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Yes?
I have a question about the marriage civil records.
Yeah.
So sometimes children, or one or more children, are brought in the marriage that are born out of wedlock, so earlier than the marriage. So what were the requirements for bringing in such a child in a marriage?
Okay, so the question is about children born before the marriage who were then acknowledged during the marriage ceremony. That could only be done if the children were born at a time where both parents would have been free to marry. So not if, for example, if the groom was married at the time the bride conceived the children, he would not be allowed to legally acknowledge them as his own. But if they were both, it was the first marriage for both, he could claim the children, but there was no requirement that he was the biological father. If he claimed them as his own, they were his own legally, and biology or DNA didn't play a role. So it's in those cases, I always use DNA evidence together with the traditional evidence to verify if the person actually was the father.
So should there be a birth record of such a child?
There should be a birth record, but it would be recorded under the mother's last name. So, so because it was an illegitimate child, all children had to be registered within 5 days. Doesn't matter if you're born out of wedlock or not.
And was that checked always?
What was checked?
That the birth record existed?
I've been doing this for 28 years. I have never encountered a case where the birth was not registered.
I have one. I
and
have
the
one.
fees were high. Okay, well, there could be one, but yeah, in the 28 years, of course, there's
At least I
always
might have
one.
okay.
But yeah, in the 28 years I've been doing this, I've never encountered that situation. The fees, the fines were pretty high if you didn't. So most people registered, and it might be done kind of secretively, like just go into town hall, and the people didn't really know that there was a child, especially if it was a stillborn child. You still had to register the death. But if it was an illegitimate stillborn child, you might just sneak to town hall and go back. So, yeah.
Thanks very much.
Okay, more questions? Yes?
How well are the circumcisions registered?
Okay, for Jewish people, the circumcision records, they are also part of the records that were transferred by the churches in 1811. So they would be at government archives for the period up to 1811. And after 1811, it depends on the synagogue. Okay, have time for a few more questions, yeah?
For the wedlock birth, there are two possibilities for the birth records. Either the father is registered, but the child has the mother's name, or it's registered as father unknown.
Well,
And in both
officially the
cases,
father...
you see at the marriage that the parent or the people who's marrying recognize the child.
Officially, a child out of wedlock, the registrar was not allowed to record the father. So there are some exceptions where people still did it, but it was against regulations. They were not allowed to record the father, although sometimes it did happen, and then they acknowledged the child, but officially they weren't allowed to do that. So it would normally only list the mother, but then if the child is acknowledged, the birth record is corrected by a note in the margin, so you can then see that the child was acknowledged by a subsequent marriage of the mother.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Along these same lines about out of wedlock children, how do you put that in the family tree? It isn't like you have a, you know, a child that you put in there because you don't have the father.
Okay, so to put in, I just put in the mother and I don't put in the father. So that's how I do it. I just enter the mother and I don't have a link to the father unless I know who he was. You could choose, by the way, there are different kinds of trees. We have more the social trees and we have the biological trees. I follow mostly the biological tree. So I would not enter, I would enter a father who acknowledged the child as the husband of the mother, but not as the father of the child. But you can do that, and you can add it as the legal father, for example. But I choose to stick to the biological family, and I would only have him as the husband of the mother. But that's a personal choice, how you want to deal. No, I just have a mother. I don't have a father. Yeah, I just have one parent. Yeah, so that's how I handle it.
What kind of records would be available for somebody that was sent to a pauper colony?
Okay, pauper colony records. That's a period from 1818 to the late 1800s. Beggars and other people who weren't contributing enough to society, according to some judges, were shipped to the pauper colonies in Drenthe. If you go to allekolonisten.nl, and I can give you the URL, I can write it down if you come up to me, that has all the indexed pauper records from the province of Drenthe. So they have been doing all the pauper records and also the pauper correspondence. So if there was correspondence about people in the colonies, they would have it there. So it's a wonderful record collection. Unfortunately, we have so many more than I just presented. So, yes, a final question? Or is it everybody answered? Okay, you can always come up to me later. I'm wearing a bright orange jacket, so I'm easy to spot. And thank you for your attention, and I hope to see you later.
Thank you.